So let's just move past,
This sounds similar to some of the stuff that we were talking about on the beach.
Yeah. Well, especially the stuff about the shoulder stuff, because in college, I was just a DS. I didn't swing a whole bunch, but I had bicep tendonitis and I had issues in both shoulders. And when I was training with him again for beach, because I'm gonna play in the spring, it was just I was hitting balls and I was like, after 20, I was done. My shoulders were shot. I couldn't do it. So he mentioned the circular arm swing, and I was like, honestly, I'll try anything because I have to last a season. And so we started changing it. I've had no issue at all. It doesn't bother me. Like, I haven't done anything except change my arm swing, and it's dramatic change.
and the crazy part is that you're probably a multi-stable person, so not everyone can just change it, right? So even today,
Very
We
hard.
spent
Like,
some
you can ask
time,
Chris. Like,
we went through
I've
some,
been so
we went
frustrated.
through some painful sessions of hitting balls to some weird places.
totally.
But
It's
I
hard.
told her this this is actually, remember I told you, I said I've been working with a girl that I
Yeah.
totally changed her
Cool.
arm swing on the beach?
Yeah,
This is that girl.
cool, very cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's paying dividends now.
Is it
Yeah.
just for the beach or indoor too?
Just beach.
So this, one of the most common errors that I see is an inefficient kinetic chain. And the part of the kinetic chain that I'm talking about is when you're transferring energy from the torso to the arm, some people will not utilize the torso, they'll just do this. Right, so that's a conscious forcing of the limb forward. So oftentimes I've even talked about how the arm is a whip, but I was like, that's not a great analogy for the arm, because the whip is not rigid, it has no rigidity to it besides the handle. So I was like, a fishing pole is a little bit better, because a fishing pole is sort of rigid, but it has flexibility to it. So that's kind of the same with our muscles and tendons. So when we're going into external rotation, if you don't see this right here, hold on. If you don't see the elbow that far back behind their head, most likely they're pushing it. So I think there was probably three or four people today of the nine or 10 girls that I saw that were pushing. Right, and I asked all of them, did you play an overhead throwing sport? And the answer was no. So you can see how vital overhead throwing really is.
It's the
I
hardest
call it
part
the-
with young kids is they all wanna
Yeah.
push for the serve.
Yeah.
Just
Exactly.
All of them wanna
Exactly.
push.
And
I
so
call it the clobber method,
yeah, the club.
where he's like, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why, my own theory is that kids shouldn't even be trying to hit volleyballs at a young age, at least not yet, because their mechanics change completely because they're not really throwing. So throwing in conjunction with spiking is kind of a good one. So to have them go through some throwing motions, just, you can ask them questions, hey, what do you feel, and whatever. Because then you can say, hey, throw like you hit. So at least they have some experience that they can go back to. But if they don't throw, what's the first thing that a kid's gonna do? They try to hit. And then
Or they do this.
Yeah, the shot.
Yeah.
So now this is important. This is really important to understand. When they're first learning, learners will freeze, right? It's called freezing degrees of freedom. Freezing degrees of freedom is what the body will naturally do to get the job done, because they haven't learned how to actually have, they call them motor synergies. So a kid that's just learning will freeze it. So you don't want to then be like, oh, you're doing it wrong or whatever. Let them go for a while. You can nudge them, you can say, oh, hey, try to touch whatever. Try to touch the back of yourself, or you can give them different examples, but that is a strategy, right? Over time, usually it actually starts to loosen up, and then they'll actually it's called decoupling of the joint. So sometimes things are called in phase or out of phase. So if I'm doing this, all of these joints are in phase. They're all working together. A professional, right, is all out of phase because the joints are working at different times. So just understand that the kids will freeze. However, like me, I was an All-American doing a freezing strategy because no one ever told me anything at a young age. And when I went to the national team, they're like, you're swinging wrong. And I was like, huh? You think you're hot shit. I just graduated. I'm 23 years old, and they're telling me I was swinging around. I was like, oh my god! And it was the worst process I had to go through. And that's actually where I learned a lot because they were terrible at teaching it. Terrible. The guy at the time was Hugh McCutcheon. Hugh McCutcheon is a very well-known coach and a very, very intelligent one. He knew all of this. Kinetic chain, sequencing. He's, oh, your sequencing is wrong. I'm like, okay, fuck does that help me do? And so he didn't explain to me, right? He didn't know the difference between a conscious pushing versus elastic energy buildup. So there's a lot of things. And that experience has probably led me to do and to be fairly good at this stuff.
So you saw an opportunity.
Right, exactly. But it's crazy because it's one that just continues to happen over and over because it's sort of a natural part of the learning process, but some people get locked into it. That's when it becomes a problem. They never get out of that phase until someone comes in and is like, hey, try to feel this, try to feel this, try to do this. And I actually could show you another example of it that we somewhat fixed today.
And like what we've talked about, my experience is a little opposite, where I was able to naturally organize myself
Yep.
as a volleyball player with no training at all. But how am I able to articulate or get a kid to do what I naturally, instinctively did on my own, that they can't maybe necessarily go through that organized as well as I was able to. And again, probably a lot because of just not playing a lot of sports or other things.
You had
just
so
like,
many more movement
we
experiences.
grew up playing everything
Yeah.
out in the streets with our friends. So it just like by the time I got on a volleyball court, I had tens of thousands of hours throwing and hitting balls under my belt before I ever saw a volleyball,
Yeah.
which they don't have.
And again, a lot of the research is pointing to like having young kids do parkour when they're young, like jumping through boxes and
Or just
swinging.
gymnastics, like ninja class,
Yeah.
like that's what my son
Yeah.
did.
It's
Ninja class
amazing.
at gymnastics.
It's
It's
amazing.
like I'm like, you can flip. I'll never be able to flip like you
And
can
then
at 6.
what you're-
you know, it's like, you know, like,
What you're giving them though is you're giving them opportunities to what they call solve a movement problem. You don't tell them how to do it, and you're going to see 50 different ways to do it. And then in the process, what are they learning to do? This is another quote from the literature. They're learning to learn to move. So not learning a volleyball throw, right? You're doing something else. What does this muscle feel like in space? How am I learning? How am I building my proprioceptive system in space, right? Now you can put one of those in your gym and a climbing wall too.
sick.
So here's the acceleration one. Right, so you can see him flexing
Oh, there you go.
and extending.
Oh, yeah.
So that's that piece of plastic going.
Just like
boom.
bends back and then snaps out. Yeah.
Right.
That's amazing. That's totally
Did
incredible.
he get them a little further forward too, like hiking in the?
He could. And that's another way in which to try to
He probably
utilize them.
finishes, you have it cut off right at the.
And I don't ever try to actively get a kid to pike.
Yeah, I won't either.
Some of them kind of naturally do it more than others.
It depends on how far
I was
you're.
just
But I'd say
thinking
some
that
of-
with this kick, you
Farther you
probably
broad
would,
jump.
you know. what I
But some of them, I think
For
part
Paul,
of
the more you're gonna pike, it's
Totally.
just,
I think part of the high elbow cue problem for me is that if I have a high elbow and I don't have an actual cocked arm, well, then I might solve that problem for generating more power by hyperextending a bunch and then piking, which is really bad for especially young girls. That's where I feel like a lot of their lower back issues come from.
A lot of pars fractures with that
Yeah.
one. And then follow through, just make sure you're allowing the girls to follow through as people will tell them to
Stop
stop
it,
and
yeah.
shit. You're just like, do you want them to explode their rotator cuffs?
I know, Mike Moss used to do that all the time and it drove me crazy.
And
He'd
because they
stop their
think
arms.
that it's gonna help them do this. So just to be clear, when you're hitting a volleyball, your wrist will flex, but after the ball is gone. When you hit the volleyball, in order to create topspin, right, with a sphere, you just have to hit above the sphere. So take a golf club example. If I hit a 7-iron on a ball, the club is not snapping.
right.
The club is underneath the midpoint of the sphere. So what happens? We get topspin. So how can we create more topspin? Just relax your hand, right? The more relaxed we get, the further over the midpoint we're hitting the ball. That's what's gonna give you spin. right? And so again, that's another thing that's constantly reiterated, is, oh, snap your wrist, it's like, just relax your hand, it will do it on its own. But if you,
I just tell them that when their arms go, I use this cue, so your arm cock position,
mhm,
I call it a power L,
mhm,
and I'll say like, you go from power L and your power L comes forward, and then you snap into power I. And when your arm snaps into that extended position, if you have a loose wrist, your wrist will automatically
Right.
snap over. There's no conscious
snapping.
telling your wrist to
Right,
snap.
right.
Like that, like almost
Right.
like we should just do away with wrist snap
Yeah.
as terminology,
Yeah.
period.
It's kind of useless.
Yeah.
Like high elbow.
How can you tell when someone's gonna hit the ball in the net? It's real easy, when they're back, their hands tight like this. It's gonna slow their whole arm swing, ball's in the net.
Totally.
I see
Yeah.
it over and
Well,
over.
we
Kinsley
even
did that, we'll
today.
show, yeah, on that video, she had really stiff hands,
Yeah.
and
Stiff
just
hand down,
loosening
it's
her
like, oh,
hands up,
it's in the net.
and arms up, yeah,
Totally.
she's totally changed.
Totally. So these are the swings identified in research. Obviously, the first one, not great. You don't see the torso opening. And then these are varying degrees of them. We're gonna see those in a sec. So first straight, right? It's a very poor motion. Not many people using that one. Bow and arrow. So at least the torso's opening in this position.
Those
So,
aren't terrible for serving, though, at least the bow and arrow isn't terrible for serving for a flat serve.
yeah, no. And again, these are just things that have been identified, right? And the reason that it's at least good to know them is kind of why or what would be offered by them. So as I go lower, right, as we get lower and lower, I just go through more range of motion. The other part is, if we're talking about, mechanisms of injury, if I do this thousands upon thousands of times, my supraspinatus, that's another external rotator, supraspinatus is responsible for abduction. If I constantly do that over and over and over, I will fatigue that muscle. So when people don't understand what the rotator cuff does, they say, oh, it's bad for your rotator cuff. It's like, this is bad for the rotator cuff in the sense that you're just doing it constantly. You're constantly turning on the muscle. So as we go to the last one, in the circular one, the supraspinatus doesn't turn on. You're not abducting away from the body. All you're doing is using gravity to allow the arm to come up and around, right? Which is another benefit of it.
I didn't even think about though that, Bob, like, I wouldn't teach circular arm swing necessarily for serving, like instinctively, I teach them more of a, I guess like a low bow and arrow is probably the closest thing on that screen to
Well, it's the same
positions I
thing.
would be,
I'm not gonna tell them to do anything.
yeah.
Just do it. Let them figure it out. And then what ends up happening is somebody that just starts, right, and somebody that's doing a circular swing, and a coach gets irritated because they're not going over the net. What do they tell them? Well, get your elbow up. Well, maybe give them a chance, right? Give them a chance to get motion.
Yeah.
Right, because you're gonna be giving them a chance to actually get more momentum into the swing. They're gonna have to do all this control, right? In a float serve, very different from spiking. The
Right.
elbow leads. That's how you hit the bottom of the ball. You don't hit the top of the ball, right? But those things you have to let them build.
Right.
So
They'll
is this
naturally-
for
they'll-
serving or hitting?
This is
Because
for
there-
hitting.
This is spiking.
Because it's not, there's not enough tilt on the shoulder.
Yeah, no. I mean, you can tilt, and so you're gonna see some hitters tilt more than others. And a tilt, again, if you want that seesaw motion, it helps. And these are in a standing position, these swings were in.
But you saw like that one kid who was with the legs up, that was way cocked that way. He had that huge high offhand reach, but then your girl that you used for the wind up phase, she didn't really have
No,
a big high reach.
No.
She just spread. So
Yeah.
you saw a big scapular retraction out of that girl like this. So she swung more, but she's getting that big torso
yeah.
rotation backwards, whereas
And
like,
you have
getting
to-
back to serving, I think that's the biggest thing that I experienced with the Munchkins. They just don't, their torso just don't open
Yeah.
up. They just stay so close, and I'm constantly taking them and going like, no, back here. Like, you know,
Usually
taking their
pull
back
their
shoulder and
elbow.
like pushing it backwards. It's like,
And
no,
pull
come
their
from back
elbow
here. Yeah.
before they serve.
Yeah, I do that too. Just
Yeah.
like put a little tension here
Mhm.
for them to just feel what it's like to just have their elbow lag behind.
And again, everyone's gonna be different. right? And like I said, there are, we can go through this all day long and you can find out what's the most efficient. But if someone didn't ever build an attractor for that, am I gonna try to change it? It just depends. Depends
Yeah.
on what you guys wanna do, you know? Now, if some high-level athlete comes in and is like, I wanna try to get 1% better, of course I'm gonna do that. You know what I mean? But it's like, you have to decide what really matters at the time, you know? Okay, so identifying inefficiencies, this is important. How much time we got?
Well, I don't know.
I gotta get you guys to your Saturday. Okay,
I'm not gonna go to the match, so.
okay.
Are you guys going, Marquetta, Bob?
No.
No, you're not going?
No, but I'll tell you at 5:30.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool,
I think if we could wrap it up at least by 5:45 or
cool,
something. that would work.
perfect.
Okay.
So, here's kind of, being able to identify inefficiencies. So that girl on the left, this was just a video that was sent to me online. So this is, I call the zombie walk, right? When people get into this position, they think that they're gonna get more force. But what ends up actually happening is they never even bring their torso down, so it's pointless. You also go through, it totally screws up the synchronization of everything, right? So in the better example, usually the arms just kind of start down. They're not turned on, right? You can see now, right, on the right, huge orientation step, and there's that reference point again. Peak hyperextension at heel contact, very important to see. On the right, her arms are already coming down when her heel contacts the ground. And so that is inefficient jumping mechanics. So the arms, right, are already moving into the cocking phase, right? Her left foot's not even down yet, right? So she's trying to do everything at once. So that's sometimes a strategy that people will use, right? They try to do everything at once because they aren't efficient yet at actually separating the skills.
I would go to the length of saying 11-year-olds that come into the gym, that's what the majority of them want to do, is everything all at once.
Yeah. Totally. And that's why, like I said, I don't like to break the perception action coupling, meaning being able to read a ball and actually make a motion towards it. However, if I want someone to just feel something, that's when I will take out the live set and I'll use a holder. So they still have to perceive something, they still have to hit something, versus just making them do approaches. So I usually won't do that because they're not having to perceive something. Sometimes I'll still do it, and it can be valuable just to have them feel something. But the moment a ball gets involved, everything changes. So it's good to sort of make the skill a little easier so that they can at least sort of get some sort of a pattern down, and then you can try again. Right? So here's an example. This girl is a freshman at Stanford. She's starting. Oops. Look at her jumping mechanics. So this is where you would see inefficiencies. So no double arm lift to speak of really. And because of where she plants, look at this, right? And this is the Gatorade Player of the Year from last year, right? Look at this. And this is the first time she saw me. She saw me once before she left for some sort of national team thing, and I was like, I don't know if we have, if you even want to try to change all of this, right?
Yeah.
So really, really inefficient jumping mechanics, and then very inefficient arm cocking mechanics, right? And mind you, you can still hit the shit out of the volleyball, even if you have poor mechanics, but these are not optimal, right? Which is kind of sad because
For power and longevity.
exactly. So these are the things or the reasons why it's important to build better patterns at a young age. That's why those of you who are coaching young kids, you got a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm like so happy that Marquetta's here, because we run our Swells program,
Mm-hmm.
which is our local teams for 5th through 8th graders, and it's mostly like 5th through 7th graders. But we had 100 girls in that last year. So it's just like, I wanna get this right,
Yeah.
especially for that crew, cause
Yeah.
that's our filter, that's our farm system for getting into our competitive teams.
Yeah.
We don't, in our demographic here in Ventura, we don't get typically super uber competitive 11 and 12-year-olds that really wanna compete at that high level at that age. So it's really trying to coach them up when they're that age, so by the time they get onto a 14s team, which is most likely when they're gonna enter into the more competitive travel aspect of our club, try to give them as much as we can before that, you know, mechanics wise and experience wise, so they can have as seamless of a transition, and we can be competitive at that level out of 14s when we're going up against other clubs who, they're 14s, but they've been together since they were 11, like trying to compete at that level.
Totally.
Yeah. So,
Alright, so here's some, identifying some spike inefficiencies. Right, so this is a really common one. The arms go through a lot of momentum, right, so it's hard for people to stop it. And that's why girls, a lot of girls, for whatever reason, tend to exhibit it, right? So you can see how the torso doesn't really open. That's pretty easy to understand, hopefully, at this point, right? So that's what you'll see. So you guys tell me, this is fast motion, I think. So you guys tell me what you think. If you saw the post, don't say anything. So this is fast motion.
was that, I saw that. I knew the answer to your question, by the way.
So what was wrong with his arm swing?
Didn't go back.
Hard to see, right? So
He never got past straight down.
Yeah.
that was his double arm lift, his arm swing.
Oh, his arm
Oh,
swing.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
He didn't rotate at all either.
So this is him warming up. So we're gonna get to him in a sec. So what does his throw look like?
Mhm.
I feel like the positive.
It's the power or the, his
Just
shoulder never.
shoves it.
Yeah, it's just
Good.
the shove motion.
Good. That's important to know and see, right?
That's why I'm so anal about warm-ups.
Yeah.
On my, with my
Totally.
girls, I always tell
As
them,
you
all
should.
my teams, like, every time, I'm like, you just know that I'm a coach that is super crazy about warm-ups.
Yeah. Cause everything
Because it's a rep.
matters.
You're
Everything
building the
matters.
movement pattern.
So you can see, right, again, this girl again is probably a
Wow.
multi-stable learner.
That's so big of a difference.
So she could do it, and she went circular almost right away. It was pretty easy for her. So you can see what it does to the torso. Now, again, does this mean that she's gonna do this swing all the time? No, that's not the point, right? The point is to show them, oh shit, there's another way to do this, and then they decide where they actually end up.
Well, was her hitting different after you adjusted or tried
Oops.
that other?
Yeah, I mean, she was, in both situations, she was hitting well, right? So,
So there was no like distinct difference between the techniques that?
well, we didn't measure velocity afterwards. So,
But I mean, for her, from her point of view, I'm sure it was different.
extremely different, vastly different.
So she felt probably that she's hitting the ball a lot harder.
Way
in the
harder.
second one, right?
Yeah, and because, I mean, it's pretty easy to see because
So
you're going
they
through
will have to
range.
just stick what works.
Just
Right.
her left foot plant is so much better too.
Yeah, and it's really interesting what happens when you have someone go into positions, even in circular or something else, other things happen for whatever reason, and I have no idea why. And I'll show you that at the end of the slide, a guy that I just worked with on Monday.
But I think also, like, you know, I try to tell kids, like, when you go up and hit the ball, you're gonna be in different scenarios, and if you are a truly good volleyball player, you're gonna understand how you're trying to win. So if you go up to hit a ball and you see an opening, and your goal is to get that ball through that opening as quickly as possible because you think you can win like that, versus you kind of see that there's a big hole in the block and you can just reach back and crush the ball as hard as you want, and you're just trying to obliterate the ball, your mechanics are just gonna look different on those two arm swings. If we were just to watch you video, they wouldn't be the same thing, because you're not trying to win in the same way.
Yeah, totally. And those are, so when we get into skill acquisition, those are constraints, right? A constraint is something that basically limits a motion or tells you what's gonna happen. So in a case where somebody has a higher set, they have time, the mechanics will change. If they have more time, oftentimes you'll see people actually go a little lower in their drop. If the set's lower and they don't have a lot of time, that'll change the mechanics.
That was my question about outside and middle.
Yeah, however, now this is interesting. Now what would you think in the middle? Oh, they
I
don't
no
have time.
idea.
They don't have time for a circular. That's what most people think. In that study by Dr. George Yatzis, 40% and 30%. circular and snap was irregardless of position. Happens in the middle as well. So what would then give them time? Well, it's the timing of their jump. It's how early they get in the air. If they get in the air late, of course they're not gonna go around, they can't, right?
But also, if you just had the constraint of a circular arm swing, you would figure out the timing of how to get your arm
Oh,
around in time
absolutely.
to contact the ball. Because that's what I'll show them too when they do this. I think I probably did the same thing for you, Joey. I'll toss a ball a foot above the tape
Mhm.
and I'll go up and go and get it. And I'm like, I just can get around fast enough to get to that ball. You just can't go as fast as I can right now because you're not trained to do that.
Totally.
That's why you can't get that same contact. But
Totally.
it can be accomplished.
Yeah, totally, just gotta give him a chance. So here's that guy, and this is the same day, he was a basketball player, he was super athletic. And all we did was I have him do some weighted ball throws. I have some plyo balls in my bag. And all of a sudden,
That's
Right.
my trick with the young kids, is the
Beautiful.
basketball, just going around,
Yeah.
they gotta balance it.
Yeah.
And then they can't throw it fast, so they can't try to overpower, just throw
Yeah.
it
So
smooth.
shifting away.
the one thing that I would probably recommend is a smaller ball, so that they can get into external rotation a little easier.
And not too heavy either, right? Because
No.
it just puts a little bit of pressure on there.
Like little kids, a pound is fine.
No,
Yeah.
I want them to just throw it with their parent 5 feet or 10 feet, you
Yeah.
know, just to rotate.
Totally. So you can see the difference, right? He actually has elastic buildup.
Yeah.
Right, versus just forcing the arm forward. And then that's him swinging.
I'm gonna put these away real quick. Yeah.
So again, you see that kind of right away.
How about that?
We'll get into that in a second. Well, here's him throwing. So you can see him kind of trying to figure it out. I'm not telling him a lot of things, just giving him a chance to actually go through it. And he didn't throw as a kid, so he has no idea. And
Just
so
play basketball, where was he from?
Washington.
I was gonna say.
And he was like, he was jacked, very athletic, you know. So I'm basically giving him just some cues to try. Sometimes I'll take him into that position. I'll give him some more chances. And then at the end, right, he's still figuring out, just letting him explore. And at the last part of it, right, he figures it out and he lets it go, right? That's external rotation right there. Right? So he actually is now utilizing the elastic energy in his arm.
I thought he was trying the circular one.
What's that?
He was trying the circular motion.
He's trying everything, because he never even moved his arm that way before. So he was actually having a hard time doing this. So he was kind of doing this and this, and again, I'm not gonna tell him anything, because I'm just trying to get him to feel something first. So we went over some throwing activities. These are some of the throwing activities, and I'm building a program that people can actually follow, clubs can follow, whatever. The name of the game is variation. So why would I do all kinds of different throws? It's the same thing that we talked about before. When you put them in different positions, they have to learn more about their bodies, right? If I have them throwing with their opposite knee forward, they have to understand what counter rotation is like. If I have them throwing with their feet forward, they have to understand what counter rotation is like. So again,
wait, so the first
And that's just a
one
little
at
like
the
1
top.
pound plyo ball that you have, or like a 2 pound plyo ball.
yeah,
Just a squishy little heavy
So
ball.
on the left,
First one
he's got his feet
With
the wrong
right
way.
knee
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
And then there's left.
No, that's great. That's what we should have
Um,
all our clinic girls doing. Just have enough of those balls in the gym that we can just have them doing that, throwing against a wall.
What kind of balls?
They're just like these little squishy, like rubber plyo balls. I actually have like 4 or 5.
and
of
if
them
I
in
were
my
you
house.
guys, I would gamify it, so it'd make it fun.
Yeah.
Try to put up some targets at different heights, because it's important. If you want to train someone to have a high contact point, put the target way up there, right? That will force them. You don't have to say anything, right? That's a constraint, right? It's telling me, the environment is telling me what I should do. So if it's up there, I'm probably gonna do this, right? I'm probably gonna do this. So let the activities speak for themselves. Here's the kinesthetic training. This is just something that gives them feel for things. So I use the weighted ball.
The club.
Yeah, weights, all weights do is it gives them it exaggerates the feeling of it, right? So on the one on the right, this is a club.
I have a couple
Yeah,
of
these are
those.
just club swings.
How much weight is that?
This
How
one is a
much?
pound.
Yeah, see, I have 5-pounders,
That's too
and
heavy.
I gave it to my daughter, and I'm
Yeah.
like, it's too much for her.
Just get the plyo ball. Plyo
Yeah.
ball you can get on Amazon. It's
Yeah.
like $10. And then in the middle, the reason that I use weights is to give the feeling of what a pendulum is and how they actually coordinate their torso, right? So you have to understand how to coordinate your torso, and then you add in your knees at the end, right? Then it's the whole motion. And then you go from that to actual jumps or step jumping, right? So they actually have to utilize, right, the weight. And the weight, you'll actually feel the weight pick them up, right? So they'll get the sensation of what it's like, right? So these are good things to do on other days of training.
So you started on the knees,
Yep, so that they just have to focus on the torso.
and then
And then on the
standing
feet.
up.
And just hip hinges, so I'm not bending my knees.
And I was even thinking, like, we have times where we have like overlaps where teams get, practice earlier than other teams done, because we only have the 2 courts. So like, what can we be doing outside or in off spaces to kind of utilize cementing some of these motions and just spending 10 minutes warming up, but really we're
Yeah.
cementing some of these movement patterns that'll help them so much.
And you can even use that time to do med ball throws on the ground towards a wall where they're on both knees facing the wall. So a lot of med ball throwing activities, you'll have everyone standing open, and so they're doing this, but
Yeah.
again, you're trying to get them to disassociate. It's very hard to disassociate when you're standing facing this way, and then you have to throw this way. So you'll see most people in med ball drill, they kind of just do this. This isn't even engaged yet. So when you have them standing this way, you can do shotguns, right? And all of a sudden, right, they have to understand what counter rotation is like. You can do all kinds of
Well,
different.
what about?
Yeah, that's fine. Good.
Yeah.
Great. Get it. It's just utilizing the torso. So like, you're warming them up, and yet you're still building better
Yeah,
patterns.
because I think even like for my son's baseball team, they do this little warm up every time they throw,
Mm,
and they always take their glove and they go like this,
cool.
and then they throw the ball. They do that every
Cool.
single time.
Did your back just crack?
Yeah, my back.
Yeah. A little adjustment.
That's funny.
Yeah, my
So
10-year-old gets through it without a back crack.
these are hitting drills that I'll do off of a holder. So when you take the kind of coordination out of having them with timing, they can kind of just focus on other things, right? Now again, do I want to do this a lot? Not necessarily, but it gives me a chance for them to actually know what it's like. They have time now, right? So that at least they can explore what that feels like. And so you can see on the right, I have them doing all kinds of different things. I'll do goofy footed approaches. I'll do just step closes. I'll do all kinds of different things. I'd even tell them to swing differently, because you're just giving them experiences, right?
You're gonna get one of those?
Yeah, I know.
Can build one.
I know.
We already went over variation, so some skill acquisition stuff. So this is what we were talking about earlier, right? Ecological dynamics is kind of the prevailing theory, where it's no longer this brain processing theory, like, oh, my brain's in charge of everything, right? We have multiple systems. It actually comes from a merging of ecological psychology and dynamical systems theory. So we have tons of different systems in our body that you have to organize to do something. It's not a brain top-down type of thing.
Thank you.
Bye, take it easy.
Bye, thank you.
Yeah,
So this is kind of what we're doing, right? The individual, the task, and the environment, those are what you're doing constantly, right? So our job is to design the task or the environment to invite the athletes to get something that we want out of them. So if I want an athlete to pass the ball higher, I'm gonna put a hoop up high for them to pass through versus just a target where they have to hit something, right? So again, just traditional coaching is kind of out, right? We're athlete centered. It's no longer us just telling them what to do, right? We are nurturing them, right? How can we nurture them in a better way? And so again, with the environment, we can shape that. You can take them out to the beach. That's going to affect their step closes for sure, which is kind of a good thing. We can change different parts of the task, we can use different equipment, we can use different things. And for the individual, we can't manipulate too much about them. However, when they're doing strength and conditioning or mobility work, you are allowing them to basically change certain parameters. And then if they're stronger, if they jump higher, that's gonna affect how they actually perform the task. So here's that manipulation that I use at the gym that I train at. So instead of constantly saying pass the ball higher, design the environment to tell them to pass higher, right? So again, less prescriptive. We don't tell them exactly what to do all the time. And it takes a long time to get good at this, and it's hard. Because we've all, including myself, want to tell people what to do, how to do, when to do. But if you can sit back and question, ask them, guide them, much easier, right? So that's what happens in traditional coaching. And these are all, again, they've studied all this stuff. They'll have people that are just getting verbal instruction constantly, and then they'll have some that there's just an environment, and all of them, in all situations, growing body of evidence that if you can just manipulate the constraints, that will teach the athletes. Right? We don't have to constantly use words, and it's tiring, right? It's really hard to do. So effective verbal instruction, right? If we have to say something, it should be something very important, or we're trying to get them to do something. Here's another really interesting thing. There's a difference between a towards cue and an away cue. Towards cues tend to work a lot better. So if I say something like, get your elbow towards the wall, that's more effective than get your elbow away from you. So just that alone is different.
Yeah, like today when I was working on a girl and she's transitioning away from the net, and she was transitioning kind of 90 degrees off the net, so she wasn't really getting outside. So I just took her bright yellow water bottle and I just put it where I wanted her toe to point. And I just said, hey, when you open up, point your right foot at that water bottle.
Nice.
And immediately, boom.
Ta-da.
And it was like done. It was so easy. Instead
Nice.
of like, no, not enough. No, not enough. No, more.
Right.
Yeah, so we just gotta figure more stuff like that out.
Yeah, it's maddening when you have to do that constantly.
Yeah.
So so this is a revelation that I made fucking way too late. I was really upset with myself. It was actually very recent that this happened. So there was a study that they did on ski jumpers. They were trying to figure out what effective cues are. So this is important. External proximal cues are very, very important for athletes. External meaning external to the body. So no more talking about the body. Stop telling them about your arms should be here. Stop telling them about their legs should be here. Huge amounts of evidence that tells you that it is not good. It makes them have an internal focus, which is terrible for learning. So then it's like, well, how the fuck am I supposed to tell them to get their arms back? Even I struggled with this for a long time. So in the study, the authors put a piece of tape on the ski jumper's pelvis, and for the cue of extend your knees and lead with your hips, all they said was lead with the tape. Performance went way up. And so all of a sudden I was like, I had listened to the same podcast, I had read the study, I don't know, 10 times. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I just need to put something on them. What was I thinking? So this happened on Monday night. Check this out. So the top is that piece of tape. Watch the difference. Right?
Yeah.
Look at it. Look at his arm cocking phase.
So where did you put the tape and what was the
I
cue?
can't see it.
Right on his elbow, and I just told him, get the piece of tape back towards the wall.
So where was the tape? Oh,
It's on his elbow.
It's
I
on
can
his
see it.
elbow.
Yeah, it's here.
like
You see it right-
on the inside?
Yeah,
Right
Yeah,
here.
it's right
Oh,
there.
right there,
okay.
yeah.
Got it.
So all of a sudden, we now all have a way to talk about the body without talking about the body. If you want someone's foot to go somewhere, get the laces underneath the volleyball.
It was like what we were talking about last night about how I was like always telling the girls to get their hips below the ball when they pass. And I'm like, duh, I'm just gonna tell my 12-year-old team to all bring belts to practice, and I'm gonna have them put belts on. And I'm gonna say, when you pass the ball, your belt has to be below the ball.
Yeah.
And then bang, I bet you all their passes are gonna be what I want, without constantly telling them you need to get your hips, because then they're thinking about internal instead of some. But the thing, I don't know if you mentioned it, but you were saying like it's an external thing, but it's close in proximity
Yes.
to your body. So it's not an external object that's far away. It's an external object that's very
Or usually leads also for
Sure.
the broad jump,
right.
because they don't get as close to the ball.
Right, and you're talking about on a
And then-
3-step approach, the second step. Yeah, so on a 4-step approach, the third
Just-
step, or
it's
either
just
one.
that close.
But yeah,
The broad
absolutely.
step, when the heel
If you
gets
take a
on the
short
broad
first one,
steps,
and you're way behind the ball, you're gonna take a big second one
Yeah.
and you're gonna fly forward. That's just absolute. We can put the kids on video looking down the line, and we can have them take that first step, and then we can just show them like where they're just tell them like, hey, look at where your foot is in relation to your head. When you do your step close, you know, is your foot even with your head, or is your foot reaching out so that your heel is landing out in front of your face? If we just drew those lines and just
So here's a good example. So there's when you're giving feedback,
Wow, he really rotated there too.
yeah,
she does a good job rotating.
you can also use model learning, right? And it's often good if they're super young to use people that are either at their age or older, like different parts of the learning process. So in this one, because she's a little bit more ahead, I'm gonna give her an example. So in the example, what I'm trying to get them to understand is that the step close mechanics, if you can get them right, they are massive, right? The performance gains are massive, and it's actually not even that important to drive that hard off of your legs. It's the relationship between your torso and your arms. That's why in that study, it was almost 40% of their jump. Just this, so take a look. Right? So you can see, right, it's not like I'm trying to hit this that hard, but
Right, it's a woman's neck.
what is my what is my torso doing? It's coming way down. My arms are coming way up.
Yeah, and you're just hip hinging a lot more than
Yeah.
she does.
And that's what I'm trying to utilize, right? Is I'm trying to let my arms pick me up, right? The arms should do the work, right? But you'll see people trying so hard into their step close, their torso's upright, their arms are never
They're
gonna be
leaning with
utilized.
their head up
Right.
instead of
Right.
actually leaning forward.
Right. And so I think was it after this one?
Maybe. We
Maybe
just
not.
had that one where you caught her in that position where like, yes, that's like textbook what you should look like.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Let's go back, and I wanna show you an example of someone who's arm driven. And this girl, what's her name?
Danielle,
She's super athletic,
super athletic.
and yet super tense.
She's super untrained.
And she said she played softball for all her life.
Yeah.
And I was like, huh? I was like, can you throw like you hit?
I
So
think she's a pitcher.
take a look at this.
Oh,
Look at this. No external rotation, no arm cocking back, and
Yeah,
she's
no cock at
driving
all, just
driving her limb forward.
what age is she?
She's a senior.
She's a senior.
in high school?
Mm-hmm.
At what
She didn't start playing volleyball until her freshman year, and last year she played half a club season, and that's the first time she played any clubs. She basically just got her freshman season of
Oh, is
frosh
this the
off.
same girl?
Same girl.
Oh my god. That's night and day.
So obviously her timing's all off, but
Yeah, but her jump is,
but you can see her elbow.
she was another foot higher there.
Elbow's different, and she's actually allowing external rotation to happen.
She just doesn't know where to meet the ball.
It's gonna take her time.
Yeah.
Right, but again, the point is that you can make adjustments, right? She's actually getting some external now. And like I said, that's why I told him, I said, I don't wanna do anything more than 3, and even 3 is too many to
Really
make, to try to make really individual changes. So that's why when I had his daughter, it's like, sweet, we can focus, we can do different things, I can give different cues, and then you can see what happens. So anyway, that's sort of kind of what I do, and now he has a really good idea of it. Hopefully you guys do too, I
What's that?
You have a kind of an idea of,
Oh, yeah. this
okay.
is-
Do you have any
great.
questions on any of this stuff?
I'm sure.
Well, this is a very small part of volleyball.
Totally, very
So-
small, very small.
Do you have similar, breakdown for all the other skills?
Oh, look how she's
Or
falling.
just the hitting right now?
There's, usually I'll do because I'm a skills coach, I don't primarily work with setters because I wasn't a setter. I can't really speak to it at a super high level. So my position was outside hitter and libero. So I can teach all of the other skills at a much higher level, but I tend to get hitters and passers. So passing wise, yeah, we can break that down too, just take a while. But just because spiking's such an important part of the game, it's like